oil consumption. Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Lake, the motor oil geek, and this is not a fun topic. Just ask Ford, who's facing a class action lawsuit related to excessive oil consumption. Now, there are really three key areas when it comes to oil consumption, and we're going to cover those in a minute. We will even cover some advice for dealing with oil consumption. However, one of the reasons this is a difficult topic is because there are no easy answers. In fact, one of the things that will help reduce oil consumption in some engines will actually increase oil consumption in other engines. It's complicated. So let's dive right into those details. Seals. Engines have all kinds of seals, from rear main seals to valve stem seals. Turbochargers even have seals. And all three of those are actually places where you can begin to lose oil. And those last two can be really important because that can lead to smoking and other damage to the engine. I mean, if your rear main seal leaks, and that's kind of easy to see if there's oil droplets under the ground, that there could be a leak out of the engine, well, that's going to cause oil consumption. That's just a loss of oil. It's just leakage. But if you have a valve stem seal leak or a turbocharger seal leak, now you can be getting oil into either the intake or the exhaust. So that's another way the engine can be losing oil, is damage to the seals. Now, fortunately, API, the American Petroleum Institute, the people that make the little donut that go on the bottle, they actually test all the oils for compatibility with different seal materials. Now, for older cars, I'm saying before 2000, some of those older cars have different seal materials than today. I mean, there's literally some old vehicles, I mean really old, that have rope seals in them. So for an engine like that, you're gonna need a pretty high viscosity conventional oil that can more appropriately work with that seal material. The good news is all the modern engine stuff built since 2000, those API specs are testing for material compatibility with those seals. So whether it's a conventional oil or a synthetic oil, modern engines and modern motor oil are compatible with the seal materials in the engine. Now, as the engine ages, the seals might harden a little bit, which is great because we have high mileage oils that contain seal conditioners. Sometimes there are esters or maybe some other kind of chemistry that can be put in there that will actually allow those seals to be a little bit softer so that they can do a better job and not leak. So that's the great news. Seal compatibility is something that API tests for, and we have high mileage oils to help deal with maybe degradation of seal performance over time. So seals is the first one. That was the easy one. Now we're going to get into the second one. PCV valves. And here's where things become a little more complicated. I fully recognize this is a very complex topic, and we're just simplifying it and touching on a few key areas. We could spend hours doing a deep dive. Think about just one area, engine architecture. My Porsche engine is flat. So a flat engine like a Porsche or a Subaru is going to have more oil consumption than the same size V engine or vertical engine, just because of it being flat. Then there's other things like ring gap. All of these things factor into oil consumption. It is an incredibly complex topic. So let's put some numbers on oil consumption. If your engine is using less than a quart of oil in, say, 3,000 to 5,000 miles, you're doing really good. If your engine happens to use a quart of oil in, say, 2,000 to 3,000 miles, well, that's pretty normal. Heck, even this engine right here is a flat engine, and it has gas ported rings, which allows it to hold more oil in that top ring groove. It uses about a quart of oil every 2,000 miles. Now, if your engine is using more than a quart of oil in less than 1,000 miles, that's abnormal. And hopefully this video provides a little bit of clarity in some key areas. The positive crankcase ventilation valve. Unfortunately, piston rings don't provide 100% sealing. It hurts my heart to say that, but the reality is there's always some blow-by, some gas getting past the piston rings and getting into the crankcase. Well, if you didn't vent that pressure away somewhere, it would build up and blow the seals out. And we just talked about our seals. We want to take care of our seals. So we have a positive crankcase ventilation valve in modern engines. Old engines, like the one we have on the dyno there at Shavers, it just vents right to the atmosphere. Modern engines don't do that. They have a crankcase ventilation valve that regulates crankcase pressure, and it's connected to either the manifold or the intake system. So it's using the vacuum that's created in the intake system to help pull those vapors out of the crankcase, and that pressure valve is regulating that pressure. But what can happen if that valve becomes damaged or clogged is now it can't regulate that pressure. And that can present two bad scenarios. One, if it can't relieve the pressure, it's gonna build up and blow out the seals. Not good. Number two, if it gets stuck open, it could actually over scavenge. Think about what happens when you close the throttle. Well, the pistons are still moving up and down. They're still pulling air. It creates high intake manifold vacuum. And if that crankcase ventilation valve can't regulate the amount of flow, it will actually suck a whole bunch of oil vapor out of the crankcase and into the intake manifold. All my people with LS engines out there are nodding their heads saying, yes, it's horrible. And we'll get to those in a minute. So the positive crankcase ventilation valve system needs to be working correctly in order for it to do its job and regulate oil consumption. Go ahead and talk about that LS engine and its notorious oil consumption. There's a few reasons for that. One, where the PCV vented into the intake system basically allowed it to suck oil straight from the crankcase, but the other reason really had to do with the amount of oil vapor the engine created. Because there's windage in the engine, think about it. You got oil coming down and you have a crankshaft turning that's spinning things up. It can create a big mist of oil. With the LS engine, especially the early ones, the way the oil system was drilled through to feed the lifters allowed a lot of oil to drain down and hit the crankshaft, which of course splashed it all up and turned it into a mist, a vapor. So that vapor of oil moving through the crankcase could be sucked right out by the PCV valve. Of course, that vapor in the crankcase then condenses in the cooler intake manifold, because the crankcase is hot, makes it easier for the oil to volatilize. We'll cover that in a minute. That volatilized oil in fuel mixture in the crankcase gets sucked out, goes to the cooler area where the intake is, and it can condense. In a port-injected engine, you have fuel coming in, which is helping to cool things down as it evaporates. That fuel also contains detergents, and we've mentioned that in previous videos about fuel detergents and how they can clean the intake valves. Well, you need to clean that intake valve because oil coming through the PCV system can lead to deposits on the valves. In carbureted or port-injected engines, the fuel is washing that away, so it's mitigated. But in direct injection engines, it's not. And that's a big change from, say, the LS engine to the LT engine. where the LS engine did not have an air-oil separator built in to the PCV system, the LT direct injection engines do. Because they recognize, well, we have to really limit the amount of oil vapor that can make its way out of the crankcase and get into the intake stream because we don't have fuel in the intake stream to clean the intake valves. This is why many manufacturers have gone to a dual fuel system where you have a direct injection and port injection. The port injection really is there to help clean the intake valves because you have to have fuel with detergent in it upstream of the intake valve to clean off the deposits that would be created because of the oil vapor that's moving through the positive crankcase ventilation system. But there are some other variables here, and we mentioned it a minute ago about volatility. The higher the volatility of the oil, the more likely it will turn into a vapor. So let's talk about NOAC volatility. It's often reported as a lower NOAC is better. Well, in reality, that's true, but with a big asterisk. So NOAC, which is a high temperature evaporation test. Basically, it runs at 250 degrees Celsius for 1 hour, and it measures evaporation loss. So it's hot and fast. Well, in the old days, that correlated pretty well between mineral oils and some synthetics when you were going from, say, a 50 grade down to, say, a 30 grade. But what's come up is, as we've gone to lower viscosity grades like this 0W8, what they found is that NOAC, that 250 for an hour, doesn't really correlate to what is happening in actual engines in terms of oil consumption. So JASO, which is the Japanese Automotive Standards Organization, has proposed an alternate version of the NOAC test that runs at a lower temperature and a longer duration. This new test runs at 150 degrees Celsius, which is closer to actual oil operating temperature, and runs for 12 hours. They've seen better correlation using the revised test with these modern low viscosity oils. And one other little point you might want to know, that when it comes to, say, an API approved oil, you can report the best result you get with your oil, which means if I run my oil 100 times, I don't have to report the average, I get to report the best one. That's different when it comes to a Dexos spec oil. GM requires the NOAC volatility test to run at a specific lab, and you get one shot at it. And if all those technical differences weren't enough for you, you have engines like my Porsche Boxster. Not only is it a flat engine, it also has an air-oil separator built into the engine that's designed to help it pull crankcase vacuum. It uses that high manifold vacuum to create vacuum in the crankcase, which actually helps increase piston ring seal. Which leads us to area number 3, the piston ring. Something I know a little bit about. So piston rings function in 2 ways. First is actually gas pressure. So the cylinder pressure helps the ring to seal, but there's also ring tension. In today's highly fuel efficient engines, they utilize low tension piston rings to help gain some of that fuel economy. Just as an example, an old school 16th, 16th, 3/16 ring set generates over 40 pounds per cylinder of tangential load. That robs horsepower. We actually did a video where we tested high tension versus low tension piston rings. I'll leave a link for you in the description box below. It clearly explains the difference of, hey, there's big power gains, fuel economy gains to be had with lower tension piston rings. But you lose some of that oil scraping ability when you do that. So one way to make up for that is by using what's called a Napier style second ring that has a little hook on the front of it. New, that hook is nice and sharp and it can scrape oil like the dickens. But maybe 150,000 miles later, that hook's not so sharp anymore. It's worn off a little bit and you lose some of that oil scraping ability. Something else can happen too. If the engine is detonating, you're going to lower the tension of the rings. And if you already have a low tension ring to begin with, a little bit of detonation, which will collapse that free gap, will make it even worse. Now you have to remember that 3-piece oil ring or even a 2-piece oil ring, there's a spring in there. In the 2-piece ring, there's a spring behind the outer ring. In a 3-piece ring, the expander is the spring. And like any spring, there's cycle time. It can fatigue over time. And detonation, those kind of things, will make the spring even weaker. So that's one way loss of piston ring tension can lead to increased oil consumption. It's just loss of scraping ability. But there's another way piston rings can also lose some of that scraping ability, and that's piston ring groove deposits. As we showed in our video when we went to Valvoline's secret R&D lab and we were checking out the Valvoline Restore and Protect, one of the things that caught my eye with that product is its ability to clean piston ring grooves. Because as those deposits build up in the piston ring grooves, it inhibits the ability of the ring to move freely, which constricts the ring, which limits that functional ring tension. So if your piston rings have lost tension over time and you've added deposits to the ring grooves, you've definitely impeded the ability of the piston rings to do their job, which is to scrape away that oil so you don't have higher oil consumption. So what can you, the consumer, do to help reduce oil consumption? Well, there's a few things you can do both chemically and mechanically to kind of mitigate some of these effects. The first one is to actually keep your engine clean. And there's really two key areas about this: fuel injectors and piston rings. Let's talk about fuel injectors first. As we've mentioned in a previous video, dirty fuel injectors, deposits in those injectors, can lead to poor atomization of the fuel, which turns into high fuel dilution. The more fuel that's in the oil, the more volatile stuff that's going to be in the oil making its way through the PCV system. It's going to lead to more deposits and can cause more oil consumption. So you want to keep those fuel injectors clean. Number two is you want to keep those piston ring grooves clean. Now, there's actually a pretty easy way to keep those injectors and piston ring grooves clean. Number one is use top tier fuel. Again, we've mentioned this in a previous video. The higher detergent package in both premium grade and top tier fuel will keep your injectors clean. It can also help clean some of those ring groove deposits. When you use a high quality oil, now good quality API oils will do a good job, but just because the oil passes the API minimum doesn't mean it's the valedictorian. We've already seen that. The Valvoline Restore and Protect, the Pennzoil Ultra Platinum, the Mobil 1 Extended Performance with that alkylated naphthalene in the formula, those oils provide a little bit better cleanliness in terms of ring groove deposits. So you want to use an oil that's going to keep the engine clean. I don't know about you, but it certainly seems like engine manufacturers have been having a hard time here recently. From Cummins to GM, Toyota, Nissan, now Ford, there's been a lot of recalls and other issues related to modern engines. It kind of makes you scratch your head, wonder about engine quality today. So speaking of oil, let's talk about viscosity just for a second. putting in a higher viscosity oil will actually increase oil consumption if the piston ring tension is low. That's not going to help. Now, I said earlier, sometimes something that can help one engine will hurt another one. This is what we're talking about. Because back to the rope seals or some of the older seals, using a higher viscosity conventional oil can actually help prevent leaks from those seals, but that would be bad for an engine with low tension piston rings. So like I said, there's no one size fits all answer when it comes to the chemical solutions for oil consumption. Now there are a few things you can do mechanically to help reduce and mitigate high oil consumption. Number one, make sure the PCV system is functioning properly. If you need to clean it and replace the valve, do that. You want your PCV system working properly. Number two, really comes down to your environment. And what I mean by that is, if I drive my car at say 2,000 RPM down the road at 50 miles an hour, I will have less oil consumption than if I'm driving at 75 miles an hour at 3,000 RPM. Just the sheer number of engine cycles is going to increase the amount of oil consumption. And I can see that. So how you drive will impact oil consumption. There's another thing you can do as well. Don't overfill your oil system. As we mentioned earlier, there's windage in the crankcase. If that oil level is too high, it will generate excess windage. There's going to be more oil vapor, which could damage your PCV. So there are things that you can do as a consumer to help mitigate oil consumption. And some of them are free. Speaking of free, we've talked about several of our previous videos that have touched on some of these topics. I've created a playlist that I'll link below that shows all the different videos that we've already done that speak to each of these issues that you can watch right now for free. Until next time, thanks for watching.